Hey everyone, it's Hater Radio. My name is Chris McLean. I'm here with Ian Gibson. Ian, how are you?
Doing good, man.
So we're here again for another recap show. It's Sunday. We're recording this before the 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 Pacific time, just because I have some stuff to do, and Ian was able to join me. So I was like, of course I'm going to do it earlier if I can get Ian to get on, because I know our show is better with both of us on together. So, here we are. So we're doing it early, but you'll still see it on live when you see this, the first airing, and then it'll be hosted on YouTube after that. So let's get into it. It's week 8, a lot of big games, some top 10 matchups that we had. But the first game I'm going to talk about is the USC Utah game. And the reason I want to talk about it is because of how that game ended and how now it's pretty much the end of the CFP hopes for USC. I mean, it's, I feel so bad because it's like, I had high hopes for this team. The schedule was very daunting. Like, I knew that coming into this year for this USC team to really challenge for that playoff spot. They were going to have to really overcome a lot of tough teams, which, Utah, Oregon, Washington, they lost last week against Notre Dame as well. So it was just too many games that they were going to have to put up a big fight in, and they got bit, and they get bit twice now, and now it's tough because honestly, really the only thing they have to play for is, potentially Caleb Williams still could get into the Heisman running. I know there was 2 bad games, but he still has a shot of getting back into it because there's still plenty of games that he can perform well in. And then also they have a slim chance at the Pac-12 championship. I know now losing to Utah is not a good step in that direction because now Utah has a game in hand on them, and then they still have to play Oregon and they have to play Washington. So there's going to be 2 tough games that they have to win, and UCLA as well at the end of the game, at the end of the year. So I don't know. It sucks because it was like, they had that game. The defense was making plays at the end of the game to force the punt that Zachariah Branch returned for a big gain, and then Caleb then scored, and then the defense was making plays to get off the field, and then it was Bear Alexander makes those stupid mistakes and gets those penalties, and just, man, it just, you can't keep drives alive for teams because they're going to make you punish it. They're going to punish you for it, and they did. Barnes for Utah was making enough plays to keep them alive, and especially that big play at the end when it looked like USC was going to be able to maybe make a stop there, and then he just makes that huge run, puts them in field goal position, and Utah's kicker makes a kick. But Ian, what'd you see in this game?
So this game, this was just getting burned by the hand that, you keep pressing on the oven, because we have seen USC both last year and especially this year. They have been a second half team, and there are times where they play behind. That is okay against certain teams. For example, they didn't play, had to kind of come back in, bit behind the 8 ball against Arizona State. They let Colorado, make it a 1-score game. They skid by Arizona. Then they get walloped by Notre Dame. And in what was an absolute wake-up call, you had to play a full four quarters, and SC maybe played 2, while Utah just kept getting it out of reach. Now, USC was doing a good job towards that game, staying in it and, keeping away, but they just couldn't, get off the field. Like, Utah just kept scoring and scoring. Whenever, I remember thinking, whenever USC would kick a field goal, Utah would score a touchdown. And they would just make it where they were just out of reach. Now, then Caleb Williams scores a touchdown. And then you got to remember they don't get the 2-point conversion, so possibility of overtime after that. But that was the thing, is that USC was just playing behind the whole game. I fully believe if USC had the lead, not, until the last seconds of the fourth quarter, I would have. They probably would have won it, but instead it was script was flipped. I totally believe they slept on this Utah team as much as Utah was ranked higher than them. But it was because we discussed the same things the week before. The offense wasn't very effective, so they thought if the offensive USC does well, the defense can, kind of take it easy. But man, were they wrong. And it was a real, kind of exposure to SC right now. They seriously have to look in, because this season for the CFP, it's a lost cause now. But moving forward, they have to make the adjustments so where you can play a full quarters against these teams, because Utah was going to play them hard, and we knew that going in. USC knew that going in, and it was a big letdown again.
Well, I mean, these two teams they played the last 2 weeks, Notre Dame and Utah, are arguably some of the better defenses that they'll play all year. And, so naturally, their ability to stop them, or their ability to move on them and move the ball on them effectively and score on them, it was going to be limited because, they're both really good defenses. And then it's also in that Notre Dame game, there was a lot of turnovers. So, they pretty much shot themselves in the foot. The defense didn't even play that bad of a game, USC's defense in the Notre Dame game. They just had so many short fields that Notre Dame took advantage of it. So, but in this game, definitely the fact that Utah has Barnes as I think it's their third backup, their third stringer, as their starter now. And he's been basically there all year, but it was a struggle. But what really was terrible was the fact that they couldn't stop Sion Vaki. Vaki had nearly 200 yards total between rushing and receiving, and he was all over the place. I mean, he was wide open. He was making plays, just making their defense look dumb. And it's also, I don't know. Coming into this year, it's really a good juxtaposition between how you should treat your approach to hiring and firing people, because UCLA fired their defensive coordinator and Lynn came in and is doing much better. And then USC did not fire Grinch. Lincoln Riley kept Grinch the whole time, decided to roll the dice with him. And I think that's really bit them in the butt here. And so, it's going to be a problem going forward because their defense is not strong. And I saw somewhere, I think it was even Matt Leinart said, there's a chance that this team could go 7-5, and it's not that far of an unrealistic possibility, to say the least. Okay, let's move on to the USF game, USF-UConn. USF, we were talking about this before we got on air, that USF really struggled in this game and really was behind the 8 ball because they were down 21-10 in the fourth quarter, and it looked like it was game over. And I was nervous. I was like, oh, come on, man. We cannot lose to UConn. UConn is one of the worst teams in all of FBS. And, I know it's a road games and it's cold, but, credit to the offense to make enough plays. Naquan Wright balled out, 26 carries, 186 yards, 2 TDs, just a phenomenal game for him. 2 huge running plays that set up scores, and especially that last one at the end to take them into the lead. And then that huge fumble that Robertson had, man, that was, I don't know if UConn does score there, but all they really needed was a field goal to tie, and Robertson fumbles it on that huge play where I think he had gotten the first down and they were moving the ball, and it was like, man, I was like, oh God, something happened, and he fumbles and they get it. They're able to run out most of the clock, and then UConn had the ball with very few seconds left at the end and didn't do anything with it. So it was, it was a good good overall win, puts them at 4-4 for the year, and now they have a chance to get bowl eligible with 2 manageable games at the end of the year, with Temple at home and Charlotte at home. With both of those teams are not the strongest of teams, so they should be able to win both of those games. And then they'll have really tough games against Memphis and UTSA on the road. Ian, what are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I was right there with you, man. I was thinking the same thing. And it's funny because I was texting my cousin who was actually at UConn. He, braved the unknown land of Connecticut and went up there.
Nice.
But he so we were texting the whole game, and I'm thinking the same thing. Like, as soon as they went down 21-10, and that, they were just playing way too like timid the whole first half, and going well into the fourth quarter. That third quarter too was a complete like waste. But I was thinking, like, they're sustaining drives and they're getting turnovers, but they're not capitalizing on them. And that was the most frustrating thing, was that it literally looked like South Florida was playing better and looked like far superior team, but the execution was not there, and they finally got it going in the fourth quarter. But I was right there with you. I was like, there is no way we should be losing to UConn right now, or about to lose to UConn. With that being said, less than 10 minutes, this USF team has shown twice now. Now this is the third time of not counting them out coming in the fourth quarter. It is really impressive. Again, just seeing it night and day between last year and this year. Like, last year, I seriously doubt USF would have been able to get a touchdown with that last 10 minutes. But with the way the offense was running, and then with that momentum going in, once they scored that first touchdown, you could tell the momentum was on USF's side. Then they get that big turnover, they capitalize on it, and then USF, just runs away with it. With that being said, this was by far not a pretty game, and it was definitely not a good game. There are certainly a lot of areas USF needs to look at, especially in the short passing game. There were so many passes that were just either dropped, not, thrown in, tight coverage, and just wasn't the right read. And that was Byron Brown. I think he had over 60 yards rushing, but there are times, I think, with the way this offense should be constructed, it should be built around his strength. So if you're Byron Brown, you should be seeing, okay, if he's covered, run with it. At least get something. That was the other thing too, is that the offense, there were times where they would just, throw it away, take a sack, when you could have maybe gotten 3, 4, 5 yards and made it, 2nd and 5, 3rd and 3, make it easier for yourself. It seems like USF was making it harder than it needed to be. I don't know if they, had something on the Vegas spread, but regardless, very impressive win, very gutsy win from USF to go in on the road, cold, rainy, way out of your element, and to be down by 2 possessions with less than 10 minutes left in the game and to pull out the win. That was a very impressive win. Now, again, you have to sustain this. You have to, now play a full game, a complete quarter, because now they're at Memphis. We'll talk about this, thinking ahead show-wise, but now you're at Memphis, which is going to be a bit more, a much bigger challenge.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Memphis is a way better team, and their offense is going to definitely score some points. So the key for that game in the future is to be able to put up enough points to stay in that game. Because again, the defense has been terrible, and they're just not making good angles on their tackles, and it's just, I don't know, the coverage is terrible. It's tough to watch on defense. I honestly don't even really want to watch them play on defense because it's so tough to watch. But they did make those turnovers, and really those turnovers were the difference in the game, because they were able to thwart a lot of UConn drives. And also, I will say, the offense at times has struggled, but you got to remember the wide receivers that they have are not the greatest in the world. So, yes, Sean Atkins is good. I really enjoy him. Some of these other guys are all right, but there's some of the guys that are out there because they employ usually 3 or 4 receivers almost every formation. So they employ a lot of receivers out there, And some of those guys are they just don't have the hands, and it is what it is. Hopefully, Golish can recruit better and can get that to a point where, they can perform against better teams. But the one thing I will say from this game specifically is in the 3 years of Jeff Scott, they won 4 games. In 8 games into Alex Golish's tenure, they already have 4 wins. So to be able to do what they did in 3 years in 8 games, that is phenomenal. And you can't overlook that. I know it's like, it seems like we're kind of turning a corner here and we're like wanting more, but it's like, you got to appreciate this fact because that was, the last 3 years and then the 2 years before that with Charlie Strong. So it's been 5 years where it's been tough sledding. And, the last time that we've had real hope in this team has been a long time. So it's exciting to really see the difference in the play, especially the offense. It's like, this is why I didn't give up when I was watching the game, because I was like, you know what? I know this offense can score really quickly. So even though they're down 2 scores, I still have a strong belief that they're going to be able to take advantage of it and to get themselves in position to score again. Okay, let's move on. UCLA-Stanford. UCLA smokes them, but the difference in this game was that UCLA benched Dante Moore and put in Garbers. And Garbers had a solid game. I think this was the right game to put in Garbers because there's no real threat of them losing this game. They're way more talented than the Stanford team. I know Stanford beat Colorado last week and whatever that garners, but this UCLA team is way better than this Stanford team, and they proved it. It wasn't even really in doubt at any point. Carson Steele had an okay game as far as yardage, but had 3 TDs on the ground. And Garbers had a solid game getting the ball to different receivers. No one had more than 54 yards. So it was a lot of moving the ball around because Garbers had 240 through the air. It was never really close. UCLA wins 42-7. You want to talk about this before we move on?
Yeah, I'll just real quick. I'd say about the Garbers thing, because that was definitely the topic of this game. It definitely made it easier because you could tell like UCLA was humming on the run game. So you were right. I don't think it really was that much of a like ripple effect of him coming in. This was the right game to put him in, and he did play very well. But it was also because it was complemented by a very strong running game. I believe they had over 220 yards of total rushing, which is very impressive. But again, this was a game that should have been a layup, and it definitely proved that it was just an all-around solid win for the Bruins.
Yeah, and I don't know what's going to happen going forward if they want to put Dante back in. He got in later in the game. He is more talented than Garbers in the pass game, but Garbers obviously is more athletic because he got 51 yards on the ground. So maybe they want to implement the run game more, and I think maybe this is the right move. But I do like Dante Moore a lot, and I think if not this year, and because there's still a lot to play for UCLA this year. It's not over. They only have I know they have 2 Pac-12 losses, but if they win out, they'd end up being 10-2, and they have a slim shot at getting to the Pac-12 championship game. So there's still a ton to play for, and I think that's maybe why Chip Kelly made the move when he did, because if there is an opportunity to do it now, it's in a game where there's not as much much pressure, which there wasn't pressure in this game at all. So he made good plays, and because he didn't look that great in that Coastal Carolina game in the beginning of the year, Garbers. So I think it's a way of easing him into the rest of the year. It's probably a good move because Dante has been very turnover prone the
Shaky.
last couple of weeks. Yeah, he had 3 interceptions last week. So maybe it's just he's a freshman and it's just that's what's happening. And maybe he'll learn into this and figure it out. I think he will. But as of right now, they have a lot to play for. And I think Garbers may give them a better shot at this point going forward. Okay. Rest of the schedule of the teams that we don't cover because Florida is off this week, so their bye week. But I'm wearing the shirt because you know what? It started Florida, Georgia, and to hell with Georgia. Okay, so first big game of the day outside of the games we cover was the Penn State Ohio State game. I mean, this was a bit of a snooze game because it was so low scoring. Penn State's got a really good defense, and Ohio State has a really good defense. So that could probably tell the story there. But I really think what it is for Penn State, Allaire, their quarterback, is just not that good. He played great against these bad teams the last several weeks. So he looked like he was turning a corner. But when he finally goes up against a good defense, he was under 50% completion percentage. And that's not going to cut it if you're going to try to win these big time games. And he only had that one touchdown pass at the end of the game. It was in garbage time. So like really, you know, he for the rest of the game, he didn't perform very well. I think McCord did very well. Didn't score a ton of points, but he still had over 286 yards. And of course, you know, Marvin Harrison Jr. went off. The kid's a stud.
Yeah.
You know, he's a top 10, maybe even top 5 pick coming into the draft. And, you know, I hope he stays healthy going into the playoffs so that they get a good chance. You know, that obviously we'll have that big game against Michigan, but there's a chance that the loser of the Michigan-Ohio State game still goes on to the playoff, much like last year. It's a pretty good chance. Both of these teams are really good, and they deserve a chance at the playoff. I don't think Michigan is as strong because years past has shown they cannot go up against really good teams outside of Ohio State. But Ohio State has obviously proven they belong. But I don't know. It really has been status quo because Penn State has yet to prove themselves in these games against Michigan and Ohio State. I think Ohio State definitely deserves to be in the conversation of top teams, and Penn State probably does not deserve to be there. What do you got, Ian?
Yeah, in when deciding, I remember I had trouble trying to pick a winner, but the other thing that came to my decision is in terms of quarterback and offensive play, if you stop one of their strengths, for example, Penn State's rushing attack, will they win? Can they win with just passing it alone? And they can't, and they couldn't. And that's what it came. They had to pass the ball because the running, you know, Ohio State pretty much said, beat us on the air, and they knew they couldn't. I think it was 18 for 40, which I'm bad at math, so I don't know the completion percentage of that, but I definitely know it's not ideal.
18 of 42, so it's even
18
worse.
For, yeah. But on the other hand, like Ohio State, while, you know, in terms of a rushing attack, may not have been as effective. When you kind of look at it, I know neither team ran for over 100 yards, but they still had the wide receiver, you know, Marvin Harrison Jr., who went off. They relied on him. They also had Cade Stover as well, had a couple of big plays.
Yep.
And McCord was just able to, put it on the line for most of them. On the other hand, Penn State they're not equipped to win these type of games where you have to pass it to win it. And if they get in his face, they're not going to perform as well. So it was kind of, once you saw the game play out, and once Allaire threw his, 28th pass, and it was like barely the third quarter, that's when I was like, okay, Ohio State should have this. And once it got into the, fourth quarter, it was all over. Ohio State knows how to win that quarter. And they just ran away with it. So it wasn't that surprising once you kind of saw the game play out.
Well, I think honestly that the biggest play of the game was probably that penalty on that was the defensive holding on Marvin Harrison Jr. that overturned the scoop and score. That could have been the difference in the game. If Penn State gets that score, maybe they get some momentum, things start going their way, but they don't get that. Ohio State ends up scoring there, so things turned out differently for them. They also got lucky, Penn State, because Ohio State touched a ball on a punt return that they picked up, so they had a chance there in good field position, but really couldn't take advantage of it. I don't know. This Penn State team has talent. I'm not denying that. Singleton is a very good running back. There's some other pieces there that I like. Defense is strong, but it's just, I don't know, that they've never really had a good quarterback. And like the entire time that James Franklin has been there at Penn State, their quarterbacks have been subpar. And so if you're not going to get great quarterback play in games like this, where you have to pass the ball, you're more than likely going to lose those games because you can't rely on someone that's going to complete less than 50% of passes. Okay, moving on. UCF Oklahoma. What an interesting game.
Oh my God.
UCF, they were like doing, it wasn't like they were moving the ball consistently. They were like getting these huge chunk plays off somewhat of like the one play, it was like that RPO where Plumlee goes off to the side and the receiver was wide open and it was like an 85-yard touchdown. And so it was like some of those where it was like, whatever. Oklahoma was really driving on them a lot. And, well, they were for the most part. There were parts of the game where Oklahoma struggled to move the ball, and it looked like UCF might be able to take advantage of it. But they had the ball a couple times up like 6 points and couldn't take advantage of it completely. And Oklahoma just kept coming back and finally takes the lead and then takes the 8-point lead. And that was honestly the difference, because they took that 8-point lead there into that last drive. UCF does go down and score, but it was too much to try to get a 2-point conversion. And that's the difference in the game. Dylan Gabriel looked pretty good. He had a lot of yards on the ground as well. And, I'm not surprised that Oklahoma won. I'm more surprised that Oklahoma struggled to like win by like 2 or 3 scores, which I thought going into this game, that's what it was going to be. But UCF put up a fight, and but they're still what are they? 0-4 in conference play now, 3-4, and and it doesn't look like
big time, kid.
Yeah, and it doesn't look like there's many wins on their schedule left. So, they wanted to play big time. They wanted to be in a big Power 5 conference. They're getting their wish, and I honestly feel like Gus Malzahn is actually recruiting well, but I don't feel like he's going to be there to be able to see the fruits of the labor of the recruiting, because it feels like he's going to get fired in the next like year or two, not this year, but maybe after next year, and more than likely 2 years later. And I don't take pleasure in that. I'm being a realist. I never thought that Gus Malzahn was that great of a coach. It was obvious at Auburn where he had points where they did well, but a lot of the time they struggled in, to be able to beat SEC teams. And so they were having like, 7-6, 6-7 years. And, it was not fine at Auburn and he got fired for it. And then you come to a team like UCF, they're going to struggle against these better teams. And it's evident in these games. They're just not good enough to beat these teams. And they have been close. I will not deny that a lot of these games have been really close. This game was really close. They should have beat Baylor.
Yep.
And the Kansas State game was close per se, but Kansas State was obviously a better team than them. And then the Kansas game, they got blown out. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of this team. I just don't think they're good enough to beat these Big 12 teams. And it's getting shown week in and week out. So, and I would be frustrated as a UCF fan because it is so close, because it's like, oh, we're right there. But I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know if this team is going to be better in the next year or two to be able to actually do anything about it. But what do you got in this, Ian?
Yeah, it was very interesting. This whole game was just a roller coaster because Oklahoma just couldn't get out of their own way. That's really what it was. It was more of that than UCF. Now, I'll give it, not taking it away from UCF. They definitely had probably the game of their season, and they went up to the task. But Oklahoma outgained them. I think Oklahoma had almost 450 yards compared to, like, I think UCF almost had 400. And they were, better passing, and they had a much better, yards per carry average throughout the game. It's just Oklahoma just couldn't cash in when it mattered, and they kept letting UCF get into the game. That was the thing, is that the defense really did not do a good job of getting off the field. Once, there weren't a lot of third downs given to UCF, and I know they didn't convert on a lot of them, but UCF didn't really need them. But you were right. They relied on that RPO style of game, and they just tried their best to, make Oklahoma uncomfortable and kind of, ship the linebackers around, which they did a very good job with, and find their mismatches, which they did. With that, for Oklahoma, they need to learn, because they might have given them a blueprint on how to kind of, scalpel this defense. But it showed Oklahoma was willing to win on the offense. But this is another case where, yes, you got the win, but don't feel too good about it, because I don't know if any other team, like, say, like, they play this way against, like, when they play Texas, they're not winning that game. Or when, any of the games when they go to the Big 12 championship, you cannot win games like this. Once again, you have to play the full 4 quarters. This might have been another case where they were sleeping on the team, but UCF, played up to them, and Oklahoma got lucky.
Okay. All right. Moving on. Probably one of your favorite games, because this is a team that most people don't know about, or at least like a lot of information about this team. Air Force Navy.
Yep.
I watched the highlights. Air Force wins 17-6. Larrier only passes the ball 5 times, but he completed 4 of them for 151 yards. So that's almost like 30 yards a completion, which is insane. And it's more than that. I think it's like 35. And he had a TD on one of them as well. They controlled this game, from the get-go. This Navy team is not terrible as far as like discipline and like defense. It's just they're not good enough to beat one of the better academy teams, which Air Force is clearly the better academy team this year. And they have a shot. Honestly, I would love if they won out. I would love to see them, if not in a very good bowl, maybe in a New Year's Six bowl, because it's like, why not? Like, I mean, what does it even matter with these bowl games? Like, give Air Force a chance. Like, let's see Air Force
if they go undefeated and win the Mountain West, I agree.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'd like to see that. I think everyone would like to see that, because it'd be kind of cool. It'd be like, we don't normally get a academy team actually going up against really good teams. And, I know Army got smoked by LSU, but Army isn't that good this year, but Air Force is. So maybe, Air Force goes up against one of these good teams, and maybe they actually make a game of it. But your thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, just real quick. It was definitely really entertaining to see Air Force, kind of, use, I wouldn't even call it a trick play because it's a pass play, but you can tell Navy was not ready for it. So they literally maybe had 3-4 times at best to really, kind of jump on them. And Air Force, did it. They did it at the best possible time, because again, they scored that, 90+ yard touchdown backed up on their own end zone.
Yeah.
But all around, defensively, Air Force, shelled out and did a good job of, playing keep away from Navy. Navy had to forced to rely on the air, and as good as they actually did on the passing game, that's just not their style of play. So Air Force, well controlled the game. I think they almost tripled the amount of yards Navy had. So all in all, the score definitely, I wasn't surprised by that, but I mean, it was a very kind of predictable outcome for the Falcons.
Yeah, they had 288 to their 124. Yeah, so almost triple. Okay, moving on. Washington State, Oregon. The score doesn't show how Oregon pretty much took control of this game in the second half. They win 38-24. It was a close game in the first half, but Oregon really just Oregon is proving that they're definitely one of the better teams in the country by far. Like, it's not even and I know they lost to Washington last week, but it was obviously a close game because they had the field goal attempt at the end to tie. So, it's Bo Nix is a very capable quarterback, threw for 293 yards, 2 TDs. Their running attack was solid. Irving had 129 yards on the ground. Nix was throwing the ball to different receivers. They were ahead enough into the fourth that it was, on cruise control at the end. And, they didn't even throw the ball a ton, and they still had nearly 300 yards. They threw it 25 times with 18 completions. And, they had no turnovers. Cam Ward had a good game, but, besides Cam Ward, the rest of the team wasn't that amazing. Some of the receivers had some decent yardage, but they didn't run the ball very well at all, Washington State, and much to do with probably Oregon's defense and the fact that they were behind in the second half so much. But what are your thoughts, Ian?
Yeah, for this one, it came down to, like we talked about in the preview, Oregon had enough weapons, especially on the rushing attack. They had enough wide receivers. Bo Nix played a great game. And then, Bucky Irving had a fantastic game rushing it. So they had all those weapons, and all Washington State had was Cam Ward. And as great as Cam Ward is, and he really, God bless him, it was literally just the entire offense. I think he threw it for 400 yards, had the touchdown and all that.
450, I believe, something like that.
Yeah, something ridiculous. Which will bring something about Oregon's defense in a sec. But yeah, it just, was the fact that Oregon had more weapons to, deal with, and Washington State, as good as Cam Ward did play, that just you needed more, for that to beat Oregon. You can't just do it with one guy against this team. With that being said, the one thing I did see, now this game was close, and Washington State, with mostly on the back of Cam Ward, almost had 500 total yards they got really close to 500 total yards of offense. And this is something I've seen with Oregon, and especially against Washington State. Mobile quarterbacks are their Achilles heel. They cannot keep them in the pocket. For whatever reason, Oregon doesn't put a spy at linebacker, or at least as often as they should with these guys. So that is one thing that is very critical for Oregon going forward. They have to adjust the defensive scheme when they know they're playing against these, dual threat quarterbacks. It'll work against teams, that were like, they beat Hawaii, they beat Stanford, and they did blow out Colorado with Sanders as a mobile quarterback. But it's a matter of like just containing them in the pocket. That's why we're thinking way too far ahead here. But when they do play a team like, USC and Caleb Williams, or even Arizona State, it's going to come down to, how well can you contain that mobile quarterback? Because they ran all over him with Cam Ward and Michael Penix Jr. as well. So that is one thing I'll say for Oregon's sake. Offensively, fantastic. Defensively, have to adjust when you're facing these dual threat QBs.
All right, moving on. This was a fun one. Tennessee, Alabama. I honestly, coming into halftime when they were up 20-7, I could have swore that Tennessee was going to win this game because they were getting down the field, getting scores, and they were really bottling up Milroe, and Milroe was like not able to convert third downs, and they were struggling. And then I don't know what it was at halftime, but they really turned it on, Alabama, and they really shut down Joe Milton, and Milroe went off. I think they ended up scoring 27 points.
I think it was 27
from
on
that
hands.
point. Yeah. So 27 points in one half, and then Tennessee didn't score any, and they were clearly the better team in the second half, and it wasn't even close. They got the scoop and score late, so that kind of helped with the scoring. But they were moving the ball. Milroe was making plays. He had a lot of long touchdown throws, and they made the stops when needed. And this Bama team, if they figure things out, man, they really have a shot at getting back in the mix. I know they lost to Texas earlier in the year, but it doesn't hurt their SEC championship goals. And if they keep on winning, obviously the LSU game now stares, down the barrel because it's coming up not next week, but the week after, I believe. And so, it's interesting. The people had basically thrown dirt on Nick Saban's grave and were just assuming that he was done and that this team wasn't good enough. And they were throwing a lot of praise behind Tennessee because it was like, oh, they were still, 5-1 or whatever they were coming into this game. And, they were moving the ball, in the run game, and the defense was playing strong for Tennessee. But honestly, man, this Alabama team is now where we thought they were dead. They have life, and it's I don't think Georgia is as unbeatable as people thought, and I think Bama has a chance here to really kind of get on a roll. They have tough games, like I said, like the LSU game and the Auburn game, and then if they do make it to Atlanta for the SEC championship game. So we'll see. They're going to get tested, but this team, as of right now, looks pretty stout, especially on defense, and they look to take advantage of the situation. So what are your thoughts, Ian?
Yeah, this was literally a two-faced game because it was one team showed up, the other took a break, and then the second half it was completely flipped. Tennessee had this game. They had them. They were getting pressure on Milroe, and that is one thing that you can see. If you get Milroe to force him to throw it, you're gonna end up pretty good. But with Tennessee, they just, for whatever reason, got away from that. They played more zone, and Milroe was able to kind of run it more, go through his progression, and they made him comfortable in the pocket. That is the last thing you want to do with these QBs. So Tennessee really, they got bit hard for that. But they were up, 20-7 going into half, and then Bama gets the ball really quick, and scores instantly. It didn't take long. It was only 2 plays in the
it was 2
second half.
plays, 70-yard drive, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Tennessee, gave up a touchdown, and that was where you could kind of feel Tennessee was playing not to lose instead of win, which you just can't, against Bama, that's not how you're going to win. You have to attack. Tennessee was playing very passive. Play calling got very, shallow, wasn't very creative. And their offense relied on, getting Milton to, do something with what he had. There wasn't a lot of movement going on the offensive side for Tennessee when the few times they had the ball. And that was the biggest thing, too. A part of the reason why Alabama dominated is because they dominated time of possession. Bama, I know they got outgained bad from the first half, and they committed more turnovers, but they really took it to them on time of possession, and they were just playing keep away from Tennessee because they knew Tennessee, sputtering on defense, take advantage of it while you can, And, in the times Tennessee did have it on, offense, they weren't out there for one, and the defense couldn't get a break. So this was like a textbook Alabama comeback, because we've seen this before where Alabama will maybe go down by a score or two going into the half, and then they just turn on the Jets, and the opposing side is just left scrambling. So this is a very good comeback win for Bama. It does affirm a lot of the belief that Alabama's still Bama. Although personally for me, I don't know if this is like the former like elite God beaters Bama teams, but they're still very, very good and can win these games still. That this is not pass them by. For Tennessee, on the other hand, this is another game where they just got in their own way, and they're still struggling to find an identity on offense. It is literally just Milton doing whatever he can to make plays. It wasn't like last year where there was like a cohesion. They were able to have the wide receivers like Hyatt and the QB in rhythm. There has been no rhythm for the most part for Tennessee. And you see once they get off their game, they really struggle. That is another thing too. When Tennessee is not playing their game, they just can't adjust to it. It's either the game plan, or if something gets thrown in the way, they just throw their hands up in the air and then try everything. There's like no backup plan I've seen this year. Best example was against Florida. Defense shut them down the first half, and then you just could see Tennessee sputtering after that.
Yeah. I think like a good comparison with this Bama team is like the teams from like that first playoff iteration in 2014 and like 2015, like similar. There was obviously a lot of talent on those Bama teams, but like quarterback wise, they weren't the strongest. And I think that really is why this team is limited, because those quarterbacks during that era, the 14 and 15 seasons, even though they did win, I think they won the championship either in 15 or 16, that they were limited, passing wise, but they were still a strong team to overcome some of that. And I think that this team does that. They're able to overcome their weaknesses. Okay, moving on. South Carolina, Missouri. This Missouri team keeps winning, and their defense is very strong. Where last week South Carolina put up 37, 39 points up against Florida. This week they're only able to put up 12 points on the road against Missouri. It says a lot to Missouri's defense, especially because they were able to hold Mario Anderson under 68 yards rushing, and hold Leggett under 50 yards receiving as well. So they definitely, their defense is their strong suit, and they struggle in that LSU game, but most defenses are going to struggle against LSU, but they're able to do enough on offense. Cook had 198 yards, not a great day, but a good enough day. And then Schrader was really the difference. He had 159 yards on the ground. This Mizzou team is for real. They play a tough schedule to finish off the year. They got
excuse me,
Georgia. You all right?
Yeah, I just sneezed.
Oh, I didn't know. Sorry. Bless you.
Thank you.
They play Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida the next couple of games. So if their season is going to be as good as they want it to be, it's going to be proven in these next 3 games. It's really a round robin now with all these teams, because all 4 of them have legitimate shots at taking over the SEC East, if not just the top spot, but then definitely the second spot as well. So we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. But what are your thoughts before we move on, Ian?
Yeah, for this one, it's Missouri seems like this is like ironically mirroring kind of what South Carolina did last year, or even Tennessee last year. They're just finding ways to win these games. But you are right. This is where you're going to see they're going to have to prove themselves. They got that big win against Kentucky. They barely lost against LSU. But now their next game after this, going into their bye week, now you got to play Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, and then at Arkansas. That is a gauntlet and a half, especially at Athens to kick it off. So it's going to, this is really going to, prove how good they are. Regardless, it is still very impressive to see this Missouri team, very down the last 2 years to have a very successful year this year. They're automatically going to a bowl game and should have a couple more wins in the way. It is a possibility that if they rattle it off and they run the table here, likely they'll lose to, South Carolina or likely they'll lose to Georgia, maybe one other team. But when it comes down to it, there's a possibility of them going to New Year's Six, and that would be very impressive for a team that was really kind of spinning its wheels the last couple of years.
Well, I mean, they would have to. They're not going to beat Georgia. Georgia's going to beat them because it's in Athens, and then they have to beat one of two between Florida and Tennessee. I don't see them beating both. I see them losing at least one. And if that's the case, if they go 9-3, they probably won't get a New Year's Six bowl. But stranger things have happened. I think
Florida got a New Year's Six at 9-3. So,
oh, I know. That's what I'm saying. Like,
there's potential.
I was saying that. I'm not.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah.
saying, I just don't. I don't see a Missouri team though, because it's one thing a Florida team, a team with like fans that travel, a Missouri team that like no one outside of Missouri cares about, is really tough to sell for these big bowls. Okay, let's move on. I'm gonna do this one real quick because it was a very terrible, low-scoring Big Ten game that I really just love so much. Minnesota wins 12-10, beats Iowa. The only thing I want to talk about was that punt return.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
I don't know, man. I really can't tell if he actually signaled it or not. I don't know what they were looking at. I mean, obviously he's making a hand motion, but it's like he's making a hand motion telling his team not to touch it or something, or to like clear out or whatever. I don't know. It doesn't look like because it's clearly doesn't look like he's going to fair catch it. Like he's nowhere near where the ball actually hits when it doesn't make any sense. Like logically, there's no like through line here saying that where he's at, he's close to fair catching it. So he puts up a fair catch. He's like moving towards it. It's gonna hit. He's like flailing around. I don't know. I guess because if you are making a motion like that, that is the motion to say fair catch, and it's a safety thing. And so they want that always as the motion. You can't like fake that. So they just have to go with it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So with that one, well, it's funny, the whole reason for the whole like waving the hand thing was actually because Percy Harvin used to do that. He would just do like this, but you had to do this specifically. But then it got to the point where he would just like do this and they wouldn't call it fair catch. So they were just like, okay, we got to make a rule for this. But I agree. It looked like he was calling them like, telling them to stay away.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That's a really, I think it was because he was doing, because he was doing this. And I remember Percy doing that, and that's what they would call a fair catch. So I don't know if that's a really like hardcore rule to abide by. But I mean, so here's the thing. They get the fair catch and the ball is at like what, midfield, and you have a minute left and you can't get to field goal range.
Yeah.
Like true. I get it. Iowa does not have a good offense. In other words, the sky is blue. But dude, at least like, so what? They were at like what, the 45-yard line, 10, 20. You can't get 20 yards. Like, really? You can't? I don't know. So that was while everybody was freaking out about that, I'm like, well, first of all, how do you lose 12-10? Second of all, how do you not get 20 yards to even get into field goal range?
Yeah.
That was the biggest thing. Yeah, that's a really bad call. but still, in my opinion, like Iowa, they got nobody to blame themselves. You had 4 quarters to score more than 12 points, and they couldn't do it. Speaking of low scoring, are we going to mention Arkansas, Mississippi State?
Oh, I didn't have it on here, but we should. Arkansas loses 7-3. They ended up firing their offensive coordinator today, Dan Enos. It's very similar. I don't know if you remember, like,
I think it was Auburn and Mississippi State. It was like 3-2 or something.
Yes, yeah, it's very similar to that. So it's it's pathetic football at its best, and I guess I can't argue that SEC has more compelling games, but they usually do. Usually their offense scores more. So it's just this game was obviously very terrible. This Arkansas team has the wheels have come off, and the ship is adrift, and it's just whatever metaphor you can give, but it's over. And I feel bad for him because it seems like Sam Pittman is a good guy, and a lot of people like him in the coaching profession, and that he is, he had a little bit of momentum there for a year or two, and could just be this year is all lost. And it's, they might just be willing to, like, hey, let's get into next year, see if there's something different. But considering that they had KJ Jefferson and Sanders coming back, they had a lot going forward for them, and they couldn't take advantage of the situation. So it's a really tough schedule. I won't deny that, but I don't know. It should have been better. They should be at least 4-4 right now, and instead they're like 2-6. So what are your thoughts of that? And then we'll move on.
Yeah, that was the only thing I was going to say was I thought that was a Big Ten game.
Yeah.
Watching that one, but I was like, God, and I'm thinking because they had, God bless KJ Jefferson, like he's literally like a Ferrari in a trailer park right now. Like he's so much better than that, and I feel so bad. But I mean, golly, you got really 4 points. You can't score 1 touchdown.
Terrible. Okay, moving on to an interesting game, a very interesting game. This was, Houston had the ball at the end to try to tie it, but Texas wins 31-24. Texas had a lead of 21-7, and then Houston storms back. Then Texas, they were matching scores, and then Texas comes back, takes the lead late, and Quinn Ewers went out. I don't know. I didn't get an actual I didn't figure out what happened with Ewers, why he went out, but he was held out near the end. They ended up scoring that late touchdown to put them ahead. But what did you hear about Ewers, why he got hurt?
There was something with his shoulder.
Okay, right.
That's what I heard is there was something bugging his like right shoulder, and apparently he tried to throwing it, but they weren't going to risk it. And that goes into next week. They don't know because he was in a sling for the rest of the game, so they don't know if they're going to have him for next week. Apparently, the injury isn't severe, but it doesn't look like they're going to want to, aggravate it potentially.
Yeah. Well, it's funny in this game, they almost got bit by it because if, Houston had the ball with like a minute left and it was 4th down and they only needed a yard and they had some, I don't know, their play call was kind of interesting. I would have thought they would just run the ball or even do like the brotherly shove, but they didn't do it, and they had some passing play. And it was funny because it was like I was watching Dana Holgerson on the sideline like get all pissed at the end. I'm like, dude, you were the one that called that play. Like you should have known that probably wasn't going to work. And I don't know. It's Houston is definitely, they beat West Virginia at that last second, and they had a chance against Texas, and Texas is obviously a very good team. So you have Cincinnati doing bad in the Big 12, UCF not winning games. So it's like all these teams that came in have not
BYU.
Well, how has BYU done? I haven't even seen how they've done.
I don't think they've done, definitely not like otherworldly, but
Well, BYU is 2-2. I'm looking at it right now. BYU is 2-2. So obviously they're not terrible.
Yeah, I know they beat Texas Tech.
Yeah, and that's a layup. So
yeah, take that for what you will, man.
yeah, but no, I mean, it was an interesting game, and they put them on the ropes, and it's just funny that both Texas and Oklahoma come off the game against each other, and then the next week that they play a game where they play newcomers to the Big 12, and they almost lose to both of them. So interesting game. Your thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, just Texas, they got caught late in the second half. You can, again, there's one of those cases where you have to play the full game because Houston outgained them. I'm pretty sure they almost had 400 yards. And again, defensively, Texas did good in the first half, but they kind of just went off the gas towards the end. But they got that late touchdown from CJ Baxter. And I don't know how much of it was the offense kind of sputtering was because Quinn Ewers was out or because Houston kind of had them figured out. But all in all, I mean, Texas pulled out and they got pretty freaking lucky too. Again, another case, you just can't play these games against teams that are better, that will be better. Houston, comparing the two, Texas on paper is better.
Yeah.
But you have to play better too. That is really the biggest thing that I can take from this weekend.
Yeah. Okay. Next game, the upset of the week. Virginia 1-5 beats undefeated North Carolina 31-27. Drake May has 347 yards, 2 TDs, but an interception. And then Musket for Virginia, a paltry 208 yards, but they made the plays when needed. And, I didn't see the highlights on this one. I just put it up because we didn't even have this game selected as one of the games because I totally thought North Carolina was going to trounce them. Just surprising that North Carolina loses this game. What are your thoughts, Ian?
And this is what it came down to because I was watching this game. This was the biggest thing. Yeah, North Carolina, they got down pretty early against Virginia Tech, but then they got up by 10 points. Going late into the fourth quarter, North Carolina throughout this game, they played better. They gained more yards. And yeah, Virginia had more big plays, but North Carolina was more consistent because Virginia gave up like 2 turnovers, I think. I looked at it. It was Virginia had over 37 minutes of possession time. So as soon as Virginia scored, there was not enough time left for North Carolina to respond. And that was shown when they scored against when they took the lead, when Musket threw the touchdown pass. They went down the field in 70 yards. And there were 8 minutes left, but North Carolina just couldn't, capitalize on, their possessions while Virginia did. That was the biggest thing. Virginia didn't have a lot of possessions, but man, they made it count when they knew they had the chance. And, they just kept eating that clock away to the point where Drake May had to force a pass that got picked, and then it was all game over. But yeah, that was, bit surprising. I remember early in the year, I did say I'm not the biggest, believer in North Carolina because they have been shaky at times. I still didn't feel like they played a complete game against a good team. But man, I wasn't expecting this.
They beat Miami pretty thoroughly. But
so did Georgia Tech.
Oh, I know.
By accident.
But then Miami just beat Clemson too, and we'll talk about that in a second. But
yeah.
I don't know. It's I don't know what to say. It's the ACC. I mean, they're not the teams.
Once
there
again, they have one
not
good
as
team.
Good.
It seems like it's like the thing in again, showing kind of nerd here. The whole thing in Star Wars, it was like there's the rule of 2, but for the Sith, it's like the ACC. There's the rule of 1. You can only have one good, like really good team, and then everybody else has to be garbage.
Yeah, well, I still don't even think that team at the top is as good as everyone thinks.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Ole Miss, Auburn. Ole Miss wins 28-21. Auburn gets a late garbage time touchdown to make it closer than it looked. But Ole Miss was in control of this game. They were up 14-0 at one point, and then Auburn came back, tied it. But Auburn just was not good enough. I mean, they're only putting up like 100 yards of passing yardage in games. So I don't know what it is. This team they're very limited. They don't have, I don't know. They just doesn't seem like they have many options. They have to run the ball a lot, and they do run the ball effectively, but I don't know. When it comes into these games where there's shootouts, they're not able to throw the ball. And, Ole Miss does enough on defense to stop them. And I don't know. It's just Ole Miss is one of these teams now where it's like they only have one loss, and that one loss was to Alabama. So it's like,
yeah,
they still have a ton to play for. They could get into a New Year's Six game because they may not get into the SEC championship game, but they may play their way into a New Year's Six game and potentially a playoff game. I mean, if they win out, they would have all right being a one-loss SEC team to get into the playoff. But I don't know if that's going to happen. They have still some tough games. They've got A&M, and they've got who else they've got? I guess really it's only A&M because they've already played Alabama and LSU.
Yeah,
there's no.
I know
reason
they played
why.
Georgia.
Oh, that's right. I knew they had one tough one. Yeah, they
and
have
Mississippi
Georgia.
State. You never know which way that.
Yeah,
ball's
that's true. I mean, I guess there are some tough ones, but still, they have a really good shot at it. They have that one against Georgia is going to be their tough one because I forgot about that one. But yeah, Georgia is definitely a huge roadblock from them finishing off their year. I'm surprised because that usually they put like SEC West, SEC East games earlier in the year. I'm surprised that
they don't see them this late.
Yeah, I'm surprised
at least normally
late.
Back then you used to.
Yeah, because it's not even, it's like one of the last games of the year, and so yeah, and like, dude, Georgia has a really tough schedule for the rest of the year. They have Florida, Missouri, Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Georgia Tech. That's 5 really tough games, and Tech is a lot better than people give them credit for. But your thoughts before we move on to these last couple ones?
Yeah, just all in out, Ole Miss, they got it together in the second half. You could tell they were the better team. They had the more talent. They had the better play calling. It just came down to Auburn just does not have the firepower to keep up with Ole Miss right now. It's just a symptom of a first-year team that had the cover left barren for them. But Ole Miss just dominated them offensively, and they did enough on defense to get the win.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, real quick, we're going to do this one, then we're going to move on. I don't have it listed, but Michigan State. Michigan wins 49-0, and it's again winning against a terrible team. So I don't know why this Michigan team gets as much credit as they do because they have not played anyone yet, but they still have at least 2 games against good teams, and it's Penn State and Ohio State. And they should be Penn State relatively easy, but they'll get a matchup against Ohio State. Real quick, your thoughts, and we'll move on.
I mean, is anybody surprised? I mean, we knew Michigan was going to run away with this. Shutout was just kind of icing on the cake, but we kind of figured, if there was any game for Michigan to pull a shutout, it was this one.
Okay. All right. So I came into this game, the Duke-Florida State game, and I was like, okay, Riley Leonard's probably not going to play. I'm just going to barely watch this, whatever. And then he freaking plays. And I was like so excited. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to play. And like, he's playing. They're getting 4th down stops. They're like, Duke is moving the ball. They're scoring. They were up 17-7 at one point. They were up another 10 points at one point. They had like a pick 6 for a touchdown. And then they gave up a kickoff return for a touchdown, which it sucked, but whatever. They were still in the lead, and they had a shot at going up another 10 points, and they're driving, and Riley Leonard goes back on a pass, and the Florida State player twists his helmet off, literally ripped off his head like a barbarian. And then because Leonard was trying to avoid the contact, he like awkwardly lands on his ankle and twists it again. And so they take him out, and then they don't score any points on that drive. And that game was basically over at that point. It was over. It wasn't even basically, it was over. And so, like, I know Florida State, you won by 18 points and you think, oh, yeah, we were the better team. But Duke was the better team throughout that game with Riley Leonard in. And if he stays in that game, I think they win that game. And it's a shame just for me as a viewer of college football that Florida State was so fortunate in that, and they didn't have to face Riley Leonard for the entire game. And I know you can say the stats, whatever. I don't really care. That guy, the backup, he's not good at all. He doesn't know how to run the offense. Leonard, even hurt, knows how to run the offense and to put them in position and what checkdowns and whatever to do to get them in position, the shift the line over, anything. He does that very well. And obviously that backup doesn't know what he's doing. And it was completely different from once he goes in, because yes, Florida State started scoring, but it was because Duke couldn't hold on to the ball. And that was largely the reason why Florida State was struggling, was because Duke was moving the ball quite well on them and keeping the ball away from Florida State. From the point on when Riley Leonard goes out, it was completely different. And it's a shame as college football viewers that we did not get to see that, because it would have been such a huge win for Duke. And it's a shame that we didn't get to see that.
Yeah, I agree for me that once Riley Leonard was out, it was just a different type of game. With that being said, though, I've had the same feeling with this game as I did with like the Tennessee-Alabama game. Once Florida State returned that kick, and they made it within, they tied it. I could kind of tell, it was like going down a grease pole. It's just Duke did not have enough in the tank to win the game. They had enough to win the first half, but they didn't have enough to win the second half. Florida State did. Florida State had the talent to afford a really bad start. But this is, again, what I'm going to say. You can't afford that when you go to these championship games and face these better teams. So I do agree. Florida State got very, very lucky because they were outplayed big time throughout most of that game. Once Riley Leonard's out, and once it got to the fourth quarter where you could tell this game is in Florida State's control, then they started piling up the numbers. But I agree. Florida State definitely, score doesn't dictate how the game actually played. But they got very lucky. But once they scored that touchdown in the second half, you could tell there just wasn't enough for Duke to stay in the game.
Yeah, I mean, their backup is clearly nowhere near to the level as Riley Leonard. And, I mean, granted, Florida State is a good team. I'm not denying that. I guess I'm remarking about how fortunate they've been in these bigger games that they've played. In the LSU game, LSU all year has scored like very well on teams. For whatever reason, LSU moved the ball up and down on Florida State, but then couldn't convert scores in that game. Then in the game against Clemson, Clemson is winning this game and should end up winning that game. But then Klubnik gets sacked for a fumble that gets returned for a touchdown. Florida State does nothing in that second half on offense to really deserve to be in that game. And then in this game, clearly Duke is the better team. And then Riley Leonard goes out. And that was the difference. It was a clear difference. There was no other, like, from that point on, Duke didn't score a single point, didn't have, like, they went punt, down, turnover on downs. Turnover on downs the second Riley Leonard goes out, punt, turnover on downs, and then end of game. So clearly it was a difference. Before that, Riley Leonard had them moving all over the field. It's frustrating as a college football fan to see that happen. It's just much like what happened last year with Georgia against Ohio State with Marvin Harrison getting knocked out. And then the year before with Jamison Williams hurting his knee against Georgia as well. So Florida State wins, continues their season. I really still think that Florida has a shot against them because the Florida game is at home. It's obviously a couple weeks away, so we're not going to talk about that yet, but I still think that Florida can disrupt their season. Your thoughts last on this before we move on to the last two of them?
For at the very least, Florida State, again, they know what they can do to win these games because they have the talent to afford getting down against these teams. But again, you just can't afford that when you play these better teams that they will, once they go to the ACC championship and how very likely go to the playoff, they just can't sleep on these games.
Okay, last two. Arizona State, man, very much stymied Washington. Washington wins 15-7, but this game was much closer. Even in that last the final score, it was a very close game. This was, I thought Washington was going to lose this. It wasn't until a pick six that really changed the fortunes for Washington. But just remarkable effort by Arizona State. Their quarterback is making plays, and what's his face, Scattaboo. I mean, Scattaboo is like the ultimate jackknife. He can do everything, and he was punting. He literally does everything out there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, for this one, I felt this was more of Washington just having a really, really bad game. This is probably the worst game they have had all year. They only put up 200 something yards. They had over 4 turnovers, and they were dominated in the time of possession. And also, they got very lucky because that clearly should have been a pass interference call. That was not called.
On that one before. Yeah, you're right.
So they got lucky on that one. But regardless of that, Arizona State, same thing. This is just a matter of firepower when you get down to this. Arizona State outplayed Washington. I'm not making any mistake about that. Washington got outplayed bad, but they were bailed out on high-end talent because Washington had, Michael Penix. They had, Nixon. They had all these guys to, make these plays. But, you just can't. You're okay with it against Arizona State. You just shouldn't do this when you're playing like Oregon this coming week. But for Washington, again, this is a huge letdown game, and they need to take a deep look in the mirror offensively because it seemed like they were just going to walk into this. So I don't know. We predicted a blowout, and I guess they did too. It just felt like this game would, the win would land in their laps.
Yeah, I'm looking at their rushing totals. They had 13 carries for 13 yards, and that was predominantly because of 2 people. Oh my God, that's crazy. Okay, last one we'll talk about before we go. Miami-Clemson. Miami wins 28-20 in overtime. Clemson's season's pretty much done now, so they don't have really anything to play for. Miami, I don't know what to make of this team. They lose to Georgia Tech. They lose to North Carolina last week. Now they beat Clemson. They have an outside chance of getting to the ACC championship game. It's going to be very outside, but there is a chance they could get there. I know they play North Carolina, or they already played North Carolina. Sorry. They play Virginia and NC State. They also play Louisville. So they do have a chance. I don't think they're going to beat Florida State. It's in Tallahassee. No. But they could. They easily could. But they got smoked last year. Last year it wasn't even close. But your thoughts from this, and then we'll wrap it up.
So I'm gonna make it quick. If you ever need a game that emphasizes that a team is not elite anymore, this is it. Clemson years before, layup game. Yeah. Miami let's just take the fact that Van Dyke is out. It does play.
Yeah.
Paper to paper, Clemson should win this. More experience, more talented. Klubnik, Shipley, defense has been there before. Clemson should at least edge out. But holy crap! Like there were so many times Clemson had the game won but they just got in their own way. 3 turnovers is unacceptable. But again, let's also add in the fact that at end of this, that Trevor Van Dyke is out.
Yeah.
He was out most of the game, and they still lost in overtime. I don't know. Like, this is as clear a signal that this team needs to go into a deep sort of rebuild, because I'm not saying like fire, Dabo Swinney or all that, but they need to seriously take a long look in the mirror and how this team is constructed, because the way they're, what worked in 2017 is not working in 2023. There is no way, regardless, Clemson should have lost this game. All respect to Miami. They played, a great game, and they were able to rise up to the occasion. But, man, this is on Clemson. They had this game won. They should have won this game. And once again, besides the Duke game, they just are now having trouble getting the necessary points to win games now.
Yeah, I mean, they're struggling almost every game they play. I know they barely beat Wake Forest either last week or the week before, and it was like 17-12. And it's like it's a real struggle bus for them right now. And like you said, it might be the end of the era, but Dabo's probably not going anywhere. He won 2 championships. Like I think there's like, what is it? It's Dabo, Saban, Kirby Smart, and Jimbo Fisher and Mac Brown. I think are the only coaches with national titles that are coaching right now. So, he's not going anywhere. With 2 titles, he has a long leash. Like he could be really bad for the next couple of years and they still be there. So I like the offensive coordinator that they have. He did really well with TCU. It's I believe it's what is it, Lincoln Riley's brother. And so it's just not working this year, but maybe next year. I mean, I think receiving wise, they don't have like the stud receivers that they've had in years past. So that's a big difference. They were offensive line wise, they were struggling with protection. It seemed like Klubnik was constantly being pressured and getting sacked. So they've got to make something there. So we'll see. I mean, it's obviously not going anywhere this year, but maybe they can turn things around next year. And who knows? And I don't know what's going to happen with the ACC, but that's a whole nother discussion for another day. Okay, that's the show, everybody. You can reach us at haterradio.com. I put up an article about Kirby Smart and his luck with the rivals that he's gone up against the last couple of years. And considering that they were all bad for many years, and now it seems to be a little bit of an upswing for the head coaches that are now controlling those programs. So maybe his luck has run out. Who knows? We'll see. I mean, Josh Heupel just lost to Alabama here the other day, so maybe not. Who knows? But anyways, reach us there, haterradio.com. You can reach us at all of our socials except for Facebook and YouTube. We are at hater_radio for Twitter, Threads, and Instagram. And then for Facebook, it is Hater Radio CFB. For YouTube, it is at Hater Radio, and also haterradio1@gmail.com for email. Ian, what are your socials before we go?
Yep. Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter at GGetterG.
Yeah. So like and subscribe, comment, get us in the algorithm going. Follow Ian, follow us on all those socials, and enjoy your weekend, and we'll talk to you Wednesday. All right. Take care.